Hello, everyone. I'll start my timer because Brendan is watching me, I think. So my name is Barry. I am a computer man here at SDK because you can pick your own titles. And if anyone gets the quote there, I don't know. There's no prize or anything like that, but I'll think that you're very, very cool. So I'll also plug in my power because that was wrong. So this talk is going to be about the things that I learned about when I was making the SDK. We kind of started this about 3 years ago, where our product manager people came to us and said, hey, we need an SDK. And the thing about it was that we weren't really SDK developers, which is why I stuck in this very famous dog. I have no idea what I'm doing. But over the next 3 years, we got a fair bit of experience, and we kind of kept feeding it back into our design. And I'll tell you about some of the anecdotes and just the things that you mightn't think about when you're doing an SDK. There's a really good talk from the guys who do Fabric, and I'd recommend looking at that too, because that covers a lot of the kind of more technical details about an SDK, that we take for granted. And I don't have, all the time that they did, so I'll just kind of go straight to it. Never start my timer here. Cool, so let's get started. So I think the thing about, when you think about the easy things, it's naming your SDK. And we logically came along and we did our domain, com.zendesk, and we stuck SDK on it. And that was great for a while, but then we acquired a company called Zopim who do live chat. And then suddenly SDK didn't really mean, the same thing. So we have a com.zopim and a com.zendesk, and both have an SDK. But as you acquire companies, they might come within your fold. So if your SDK is going to do something like ours is handling help center and tickets. And we call that support now. So you might as well get it started early and call it SDK, hyphen support. It'll get you out of a lot of trouble later on, because with SDKs, once you make a decision, you're kind of stuck with it for life. Deprecation is pretty hard. And then when it comes to packages specifically, it's always almost like a good idea that you organize your code into these logical packages. But if you look at most of the popular SDKs out there, they actually tend to have one top-level package. Like if you look at Retrofit, Picasso, even OKIO, and if you look at their package structure, Retrofit's top-level one is Retrofit 2. They have all of their public stuff in one package. There's no kind of network, I/O, disk, blah, blah, blah. And the reason you want to do this is that when you try to architect your SDK so you minimize on your public interfaces and you have all of these packages, you'll suddenly run into this issue where you're like, oh man, there's all this visibility stuff happening. And if you had it all in one package, it's going to be a lot easier to manage. And yeah, pretty much. That cat is representing, that you want to get work done, and you're just typing like mad. So another really important lesson we learned in the SDK was that when it comes to customization, our SDK is there's two general types of SDKs. You're going to have one that has just a API interface, and then you have one that has an API and UI. So ours is that. And for our first component, we did this Rate My App feature, which was your standard dialog box that would pop up, said, are you happy with our app? And then give you a number of options. And the goals of it, deflect negative reviews by sending the feedback to Zendesk instead of ranting on Play. So this is the UI here. And the stuff on the left is all of the things that you might want to customize. And, you have to think about what does the user want to customize. And they'll get in touch with you and they'll tell you exactly what it is. And it's very important to qualify all the feedback you get about your SDK. People will come in and say, like, I want to change this, this, and this. You have to be quite strong and say that, we're going to allow a limited amount of customization and no more. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. So this is a very simple UI, but the amount of customization here is mind-boggling. So first of all, you got your strings, fair enough. People want to, instead of our app, you want to have your company name or something like that. They'll want to change padding, colors, buttons, button actions. And we were partly to blame here because this was the first thing we did. We said, like, of course, people might want to have 4 buttons instead of 3 or 2. And we implemented an awful lot of complicated stuff where you could have this builder and you could change buttons, add arbitrary buttons. You could change what happened when you clicked on them. You could have all of these listeners that were fired after you clicked a button, which would perform some other kind of complicated navigation stuff. We did this because we thought people wanted to do it, but they just wanted this out of the box, 3 buttons. That's it. We even made this so customizable that you didn't even require Zendesk to use it. You could override the send feedback button and send it anywhere you wanted. So, you know, that's obviously kind of getting to a level where it's a little bit too much. This is our new UI, which was pretty much written by Brendan there, so it's very, very swanky. But even within this, you know, your customers are going to ask, you know, they want to change the flow. So you've got the toolbar there with your icons. They want to change what happens when you click on those. And, you know, you just kind of have to say, like, no, this is our UI and just use it. But yeah, and they'll want to change all of this stuff. Like there was we got a ticket in from a customer that they wanted to, you know, when you contract these, the material design guidelines say that you should display a divider. There was somebody saying, you know, I love it, but I want to get rid of the dividers. So, working with designers, when you have an app, it's an expression of your company. You know, you have ultimate control over absolutely everything. But SDKs aren't apps. An SDK is going to be embedded in your app, and you can't hope to satisfy everybody. So, things that we learned is that you should really work with themes. So, rather than have your SDK, which, you know, has a light background and dark buttons and a certain type of font and color, you should work with the built-in Android themes and work with them. Definitely support light and dark, because if you've ever seen something that was designed for a light UI in an app that's running on a dark theme, you know, it's pretty bad. Another thing is that you just have to educate your designers to know that, you know, this is not something that we should stick with the kind of core design language of the platform you're going for, and, you know, you have to kind of pare it back a bit. Another thing is you have to think about landscape, how your app is going to work in that, and also think about phones like the LG Lucky, which is this phone that you can buy in Walmart in America for, like, is it $9? And, you know, your SDK is going to have to run pretty well on that, and glad to say ours does, which is a good thing. So, look, it's easy to be standard. Material text guidelines. So you can use all of these, and you don't have to, you know, invent your own styles. You got headline, subheading, body 2, body 1, caption, etc. And it's easy to use these in your apps. So if you see this here, this is like a example of some of our themes. So we provide themes which will extend from the major app compat parents. So you got your light theme, your dark theme, and then your light theme with a dark action bar. Inside all of these, we'll have attributes where you can select the right icons. So when you have a light theme, you're going to want dark icons and vice versa. And if you can have a look around here, you can see my mouse points. Yeah. So around here, instead of using text color, you look at the Android attribute and get the text color primary. This is going to be read in from whatever the user has set in their theme, so you don't have to worry about it. And again, there's a color secondary. And yeah, like, so for body 2, this was an interesting one, because in API less than 21, we had to add in this bold, because in API 21 and above, it uses a different font. So there's just a few things you might have to do. Okay, so there's this concept of do your own UI. And at the start, our SDK was just one artifact that you could download. It contained our APIs and it contained our UI. And we were getting a lot of questions about the customization of the UI and the flow. And we thought it was a good idea to break our SDK into 2 parts, which we did. We have a API providers layer, and then on top of that, we build our own UI. So that's what I mean by dog food it. If you're going to do this, you should extract the APIs that you use, your various resources. For us, it's tickets, articles, that kind of thing. And then build your UI on top of it, and then have the API layer available as a separate artifact. So if people want to take that, they don't have to take your own UI, and they can implement their own very easily. A key part of this is to have a sample application, which is open source, and shows people exactly how to do it. We have a number of them. We're trying to build them all the time, but we have a sample application that shows you how to use our providers to basically do the same thing as our built-in UI does. So yeah, it's modules everywhere. And this is how we do it. So the first box is our API providers artifact, and this is very pared down. It has the bare minimum dependencies. So you can see here it's just retrofit and OK HTTP, and we have just the annotations from Android support. Then the bottom box is your UI layer, which you then build on top of the providers layer, and then add in all of the really heavyweight dependencies like support v4, apt-compat, recycler view, design library, and so on. So usually for SDKs, I'd say like don't go and implement any dependency you want. If you're going to bring in a dependency, it has to be ubiquitous, which is pretty much a lot of the square up stuff is cool. And yeah, this was like an issue we had. So when you have a dependency on a library that is so popular like retrofit, and then when they bring out retrofit 2, your customers are really going to want you to support both. So we were able to do this by extracting a little module, which was a compatibility layer between our APIs and the dependency on retrofit. And so for a while we had an undocumented feature where you could use our SDK with retrofit 2 or retrofit 1. And if it was any other dependency, this probably wouldn't happen. But because retrofit is so huge and people would adopt betas readily because it's such high quality software, then that's what you did. And then question whether you really need the dependencies you're bringing in. We had a dependency in one of our SDKs on Apache Commons, and it turned out that we could inline that code, and it was only about 70 lines. Otherwise, you know, assuming you're not using ProGuard, you'd be introducing thousands of method definitions. So be honest about your weight of your SDK. And you can do this by using dex method counts, and you can output this nice table of all of the method counts that you have. So we say that we have, you know, about 2,500 dependencies, you know, without dependencies. And then if you include the common ones, about 7,000, and then more if you have Android support. Now, as it happens, the dependencies will be shared between the app and the library that's using it. So, you know, if both of you are using Android support, then that means that you'll have no net effect on the method counts. Another thing is, so delay any network calls that you have until you absolutely need them. When you have a popular SDK, you become a vector for DDoS attacks. You know, we might have, say, 1,000 customers, and then they have 1,000 apps. And say that each of those 1,000 apps has 1 million users. And if you're doing a network call when you start up the SDK, suddenly you have a lot of network calls, and this will make the DevOps people in your team quite angry. A good thing to do is instrument your SDKs from the very start. You might want to know things like whether it's in production mode, whether it's in development mode. You can check for those kind of things based on, well, you can guess at them based on presence of signing certificates or what build config flags, that kind of thing. And so you probably want to know the version of the SDK, the version of the OS, and whether it's in debug or run mode. Then you can kind of spot that certain amount of traffic is coming from a certain customer of yours. Be vigilant for either intentional or unintentional abuse. We had a case where we had a customer, then if you remember, WhatsApp went down in Brazil, and they had a thing which used our SDK to submit a support request on a unhandled exception. And when WhatsApp disappears, and then something else is relying on it, then you get millions of tickets in one thing. Oh yeah, and log everything. It's pretty easy to do, and it'll help you when you're debugging. So, and a thing that, you know, poor Brendan has to cope with is that whenever he wants to use something which has been released and has an age of about 1 day, I'll say like, no, you can't use that. So you can do a few things. You can have a separate installation of Android Studio, the Canary one, but, you know, keep your stable one. Or Xjava, too many deps. You can develop a sample app built on top of our providers layer and get your RX Java kicks. Kotlin, same thing, too many deps. But most of our test code is written in Kotlin. And it's about, like what we saw today was about 50% of our code is Kotlin, about 50% is Java. And that's because all of our tests are in Kotlin. So, you can still experiment with the cool stuff. It's just, don't stick it into the main. So the final point is, and I'm probably a little bit over time here, so support your SDK. We're pretty good about this. We have a rotating ticket duty where every day somebody else is on point, and customers will come to us, our own advocates will come to us, and we'll help them implement the SDK and figure out their problems. We're also all over GitHub and Stack Overflow, and we're just giving back to the community. And whatever you do, you always feed back the what you're hearing from your customers back into the SDK, whether that's improved SDK, improved documents, Cool. So yeah, that's it. And if you want to keep in touch, there are details. Oh yeah, and there's questions. If you want to ask any questions, it's like we got a couple of minutes. So, any questions? Yep. Yeah, that's pretty tricky. So usually we try to keep up to date with them. So whenever we're shipping something, we'll do a dependency review. And you are going to run into problems with libraries that are pretty heavy on reflection. Like a lot of the Square stuff uses reflection. And when that happens, you have much more potential for issues. What you can do is, in Gradle, if you know that there's a compatible version, it's roughly binary compatible, you can, exclude our dependency and then favor the dependency from something else. So, you can go compile, group ID artifact and then exclude group. But it is tricky. Ooh. Cool. Well, thank you.